Welcome to the Word and Journey podcast, stories that shape us and make us think and sometimes form us from the inside out. That's my cheesy segue.
I see what you did
there.
there.
You see what I did? Okay, good.
Clever.
Yeah. Yep, that's what we did. We are here. We are talking about Pixar's latest flick, Inside Out 2. And we like this one because the story and it's a movie and it's about the inner life. And so we three as counselors, I kind of we have an obligation to be excited about a movie about the inner life. So
obviously therapeutic.
So very nice. We hope it is. But so before we get into our feelings, meet your cast. It's Reese, Caleb, and Steven. Who are you guys again? Caleb, what's your name? Where are you from?
Well, my name is Caleb. In case anyone forgets it, just again, my name is Caleb. Let's see. I am kind of fresh to the scene, to the counseling scene, but not fresh to the movie scene. I've liked them pretty much since the womb, so I'm very well qualified. Yet another white guy talking about movies, so I know my stuff. So
yeah. All right, cool. And
and my name is Steven. I'm also a counselor / therapist, and I also have liked movies basically my whole life. So there's that. And like you, Reese, I'm also a father, and so getting to watch Inside Out, thinking about my own children and children in general and what goes into their inner world. Very fun experience. So excited to talk about the movie.
Just fun, not a little bit terrifying.
Both end.
Yes, both end. I hear that. Yes, my name is Reese. One of my names is Reese. And I also like movies. I grew up on Disney and Star Trek and Star Wars and Stargate and came to Firefly later in life, but I think I'm okay for it. So anyway, so we're talking about a movie. And yes, the parenting aspect is a fun one. Maybe separately we could explore, like, would you show this to your kids, and at what age, and with what sort of conversations. But anyway, so let's do it this way a little bit. So let's talk a little bit first about the movie as storytelling, casting, and things like that, and then from there talk a little bit more about some of the concepts that came out. So again, briefly summarizing. So spoiler alert, if you haven't seen it, then you will want to go see it before listening to this. But
oh crap, I gotta leave, guys. I haven't seen it yet. I'm gonna go.
Right. Yeah.
We're talking about movies. You have to watch them. What is this?
Right. Yeah. We need some first-hand
armchair
experience.
expert.
Yeah. But briefly speaking, so this is picking up. So Inside Out 1, we met a human girl, white girl, Riley, and we meet her core emotions: joy, anger, fear, disgust, and sadness. I think those are them. This one picks up. She's several years older. She's 13. She's starting puberty, and her inner worlds are getting a remodel. And so we meet now anxiety, envy, embarrassment, and ennui, boredom. And I'm thinking ahead to, okay, so if there's a third one, we'll meet like, her as an adult, and we'll meet, rage, hatred, lust, and things. Anyway, we could talk about that. And so, yeah, so Riley goes on an adventure that evokes a lot of new feelings, and she has to figure out what does she do with them. And her feelings have to figure out what do they do with each other. So that said, I'd be curious to hear from you guys, just coming to this as a movie, as a story. What worked for you? What didn't work for you? What do you wish was there? Or wish wasn't there?
Caleb?
Yeah, I mean, I would say that it was sort of hard to top the first one because the concept was just mind-blowing and like, holy crap, Pixar did it again. Like, we really thought that they had like reached into the box of toys and literally gotten every single idea, everything that was like a fresh IP for kids stories, and wham, you have Inside Out, the first one, which is like regarded as one of the best Pixar movies ever. So I think I kind of went in and I was like, okay, I have to like kind of calm my expectations a little bit, because I don't know how you're going to top number one. And so I think with that, I kind of came in and I was pleasantly surprised with a lot of things. I thought the introduction of new emotions was really well done. I even kind of liked the, I don't know if y'all noticed this, but the subtle nod to when anxiety is kind of taking over. And then when the core emotions from movie one are kind of going out and doing their quest, their adventure, that fear kept saying, anxiety has a good point. Anxiety has a good point. I noticed things like that, and I was like, oh, that's clever. Like these root emotions are obviously so similar. But yeah, that being said, there were some parts, especially with where the plane landed with the climax, that I was like, I think I kind of wanted a little bit more here, truth be told. It just didn't have that, like, oh my gosh, I'm going through like tissue box after tissue box impact that the first movie did. But still, there were definitely moments that hit me, and I still did cry, which is not that surprising, but still.
I hear that. I had a couple crying moments as well. Not a whole, not like a whole tissue box, but a couple. So yeah. So it sounds like it kind of has that sequel flair to it, building on the first one in some good ways, but again, landing it and crafting the conclusions probably the hardest part. So yeah. How about you?
Yeah. Just me personally, like I just love a movie. I love a story, and so it's hard for me not to enjoy something just for the sake of enjoyment, sort of thing. I was a little bit cautious, perhaps like you, Caleb. Like the original was great. Why are you redoing something that was perfect? You can't make it perfecter. And so maybe a little bit cautious about that. But as a story, as a movie line, like there was a lot of cool elements. They had a great use of humor. I liked some of the subtle complexities of the interplay between the emotions. There was a cool there was a climax and a resolution to the story that felt gratifying from a story standpoint anyways. Maybe not necessarily a mental health standpoint, and I can get into that a little bit later, but from a story standpoint, it's like, yeah, and we want this message to be passed on to our children, that emotion regulation is possible, and that even after you make mistakes, you can still come back from that and you can grow as a person. And as you kind of grow and change, like you're not a perfect person. That's not the goal. But you can come to peace with who you are. So there's a lot of good elements that I appreciated from the story. And just as far as the storytelling standpoint, I didn't have any problems with the movie. I enjoyed it.
Yeah, I think I'd agree there. I like a good sequel. I maybe like sequels more than people have a right to. Partly because I enjoy the character development and seeing, hey, where will these characters go now? What new characters will we meet? What are some of the backstories and interplays? So bringing in new characters, I think I really like that move and enjoy getting to know. Here's 4 more emotions, and here's their interplays and then their connections. And like I particularly enjoyed the chemistry between sadness and embarrassment as they kind of forge their own alliance, and the kind of dichotomous approach that joy and anxiety take with each other fit really well, and so they create counterparts to each other, which I enjoy that as a character move. And then yeah, just thinking about it as a story, so it's kind of a classic. I guess we could see if it's a proper hero's arc, but there's here's your status quo, there's a disruption, you know there's the rising action, kind of a dark night of the soul, and then there's kind of a resolution, like a new homeostasis that incorporates all of the elements. And from a storytelling perspective, yeah, it worked. It was neat, it was clean, not terribly complicated. There's like the dual story of the inner world and also Riley's story in the outer world. And again, I mean, her outer world story, not factoring in like the emotional payload of anything, was uncomplicated. But that might have been a good choice anyway, because perhaps like the uncomplicated stories are a little bit more universal. And like if it was, I think one of the things I found myself feeling was I don't know, Riley's a white girl, and her crisis is, will I get on this hockey team or not? And so, on one hand, that feels really silly, shallow. And I'm hearing that from the lens of, well, I'm an adult now, and like I listen to people's trauma stories and all of like the really, really, really bad things people go through. So there's a part of me that wants all of that represented, but then I guess there's another part that recognizes, well, if they had created some super specific, intense trauma, like not everybody would relate to that, or whatever. So I don't know. Storytelling moves, you can't completely win, but they made their choices, and it works all right. So
yeah. And that being said, I think there's something validating about like the simplicity of her outer story, her external world, and the contrasting complexity of her inner world. I think, especially with that age group and people who are only starting to grapple with things of the inner world at the beginning, there's something incredibly like, I think of, what we've talked about in previous podcasts, like the Instagram effect, where like your outer world looks so much better than my inner world feels, that I will invalidate myself because I don't have a right to feel as anxious as I do, or as sad as I do about these events that are going on in the outer world. And so there's this sort of like self-invalidation that we naturally gravitate towards. And so to see her going like, do I get on the hockey team or not? Do I stay with my friends, or do I move on? They're moving on from me. Do I move on from my friends? The simple questions and the simple things that she's asking, and then the just extreme sort of like rise and fall of her inner emotions. I'm like, yeah, that's validating. You have a right to feel your feelings, because they're not good or bad. They're just information. So just accept that that is what they are. So I kind of appreciated the juxtaposition, if you will, of the sort of like more simple outer world versus the complexity of her inner world.
Yeah, I would say on that point, just about the outer versus the inner. I will say the moment that really, really touched me, and I thought, from a mental health lens was great, was how anxiety started to sort of interpret and then alter some of her core beliefs. That was really, really well done. And I felt like it was just a really powerful illustration of what happens with puberty and the sort of existential crises, which again, we're both speaking to, like Stephen, you're saying, well, it is really valid. It is really like sort of core. And then Reese, you're saying, oh, but it's like, as we're adults, as we're older, we're like, you won't make the hockey team. It's all right. It's not that big of a deal. But at the end of the day, because of how significant it is for her, it gets to the point that it's literally affecting her core beliefs. As soon as anxiety is activated and sort of like informing a lot of how she's seeing the world, then all of a sudden, you get your conflict, like we've talked about, Reese. Like you get your conflict, you get the major themes of what's going on here in a way that portion of it I thought was really, really clever, and a really good way of sort of talking about that transition of like the healthy naivete of being a kid. And then suddenly when you wake up that one day and you have a greater awareness of self, greater awareness of world, and even in the comical side, like when she's all concerned about her arms and just how she's coming across when she's walking with her friends. You don't experience that when you're 8 or 9 years old. That just doesn't register. So I thought that was really well done when they kind of showed how puberty gives you this awareness of self, and then kind of can start to shift your core beliefs in a way that I'm sure we'll talk about it more, but impacts you.
Yeah, there is that, and you're right. I am picking on her, like the suburban hockey player, a little bit, but in her defense, I mean, I get really activated about things in my life that are probably ultimately like nothing, or not very much. But because you're right, it's like there's whatever the external event is, but how we interpret it will just blow it up in our own heads. And so, and I was appreciating, you were talking about comparing like your inner world to somebody's outer perspective, or someone's external appearance, comparing someone else's external experience to your inner experience, they'll never match, and they'll always make you feel inferior if you do it that way. So so that idea to recognize when I look at somebody who's in some sort of distress, like I don't know the full magnitude of that in their inner world, or why that is, or where that's come from, and there's always going to be a story there. So if one came away from the show with the idea of like, oh, I should get a little curious about like this other person's inner world, and like, they're all distressed, but like what could be behind that, that wouldn't be a bad thing, and it would be good to be more curious about each other that way. But so, kind of gently shifting a little bit more into some of the content and some of the more counseling inner world sorts of things. Caleb, you were starting to talk some about beliefs and what's the beliefs and self-concept. What are some of your observations, critiques from the show?
Yeah, like I was saying, I really did enjoy sort of how they would each of the emotions would kind of like fiddle with the belief, and then some evoking statement would come up, like I am kind, or I am a generous person, whatever the thing might be. So it just kind of, again, I was just really moved by once anxiety shows up, which in general I thought they like really hit the nail on the head of what anxiety is like, especially from that younger perspective. But even as we get older, and just this constant planning, that was kind of the bit about anxiety that I thought was really, really well done. That's sort of what it's like, is this sense of always having to plan for every conceivable thing and all of the stress that produces. But yeah, again, that just informs the way that you're starting to believe about yourself. Yeah, I was really stirred by that. Trying to think of what there were other moments about core beliefs that kind of stuck out to me. But yeah, I mean, I'm not sure, Stephen, if you have something to piggyback from there, but
yeah, no, I liked how they portrayed sort of the different levels of belief, right? And how the thoughts turn into beliefs, which turns into an identity. And I liked the evolution of her identity from like, I'm a good person, to like falling into this state of like perpetual anxiety and saying, I'm not enough. I really like that a lot. And I think that speaks to very, very nicely to the human experience of like, a thought shapes a behavior, which shapes your destiny, so to speak. I'm terribly misquoting somebody who said it much better than me, but I thought that they did that well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, that's that's the core of a lot of our therapeutic modalities, is looking at that sequence. And I mean, there's going to be like little variants, but it is something like, well, depending on where you start, feelings shape thoughts, or I'm getting it mixed up. Thoughts and feelings, they shape each other. That affects your beliefs. That affects your actions, which creates experience. And then you have more thoughts and feelings about those experiences, which then begin to reinforce each other. So it seems like this movie is, they're really landing on your self concepts comes out of your beliefs. Beliefs come out of memories and emotions, and what you do with them. So I mean, do we have comments in favor of or contradicting that at all, or are they spot on?
well, can you rephrase that again?
I am clumsily inviting discussion. I think, well, okay, so here's what I'm thinking. So in the show, the upgrade. So in the first one, you get a sense of here's Riley, here's her emotions, here's her personality islands that get built up or they crumble and things. And in this one, they've kind of pushed that into the realm of knownness. So now we're talking about self-concept. Who is Riley? Who's the authentic Riley? And my pushback on how they present it is Riley as this very self-contained organism. And there's a soft edge to that because her outer story does have a lot to do with her friends, and I really appreciate how for Riley a lot of her resolution at the end comes when she reconciles or begins to reconcile with her two friends. I'm really glad that they put that in. I wish that had been built up more, and I think that would have helped it to land a little bit more for me. There's this nod to, okay, I'm back with my friends, things are good. But the up until then, there's a much stronger emphasis on I have these two narratives going on. Like, I'm a good person, I'm not good enough. Which will I do? And the way that most of the story is played out, she doesn't reach outward for anything. It's all like I have to find some will within myself to switch narratives, or my emotions have to war with each other until the right ones, win out. And um, from my perspective as a counselor and also as an Orthodox person, let's say there's something missing there because she's alone. She's this isolated little self-contained island of emotions, and hopefully she gets it right per whatever her definition of right is. A different ending I would have loved. I mean, you can do this in an hour and a half movie, but really leaning into like she takes responsibility for how she's impacted her friends. Like there's a more active, we reconcile, we recreate, we reestablish a attuned attachment with each other as the foundation for self, or even depicting more like the coming back to her parents. Like I think that was a big part of the first one too, is her coming home, coming back into relationship was a major component of her being okay.
Yeah.
And they don't really they kind of nod at that here a little bit, but not very much, I thought.
It's sort of
Yeah,
it's sort of the result of the resolution of her inner struggle, right? Like, because her inner struggle resolved, she's able to come back into connection with her friends, and that's not necessarily typically the case.
Yeah, it's not wrong. I mean, sometimes that is the case. We have to inner struggle before we can really enter communion with someone.
Yeah.
But that's also a little bit more of like an adult thing too.
Yeah.
I was going to say, I mean, that's going to be really difficult for a 13, 14, 15-year-old. I mean, that was the scene that, and I'm going to give credit to my wife that's in the next room. She pointed this out. She's like, if you say this, make sure to get my credit. But we were just talking about how, in some ways, the ending and the way that it resolved was really like Western informed and individualistically informed. That she kind of just, it suddenly all dawns on her, and they did a good job of like portraying how it dawns on her. But like we're saying on the clinical side, I mean, if it was to be a little bit more accurate, it would almost feel like it would have to be like we were spitballing the idea of like, what if it was her teacher that like caught her when she was trying to find the book? And then, she's all worried, anxious, like, oh no, the teacher's going to be, but then the teacher, does the classic, like back in my day, and then there's this whole moment where, like you're saying, externally, somehow Riley gets like the next puzzle piece to kind of get her to that sense of regulation, so that if she experiences the panic the next day of like, I want to make the team, that's still important to her. It should be important to her. But when she was experiencing that panic episode, the internalized portion of that and how anxiety was like frantic was perfect. I really loved that a lot. Like, I thought that was really, really well done. Yeah. But it was kind of surprising that she just in and of herself kind of got better. I sort of assumed that her friends were going to sort of see what was happening. And then sort of to what you were saying, Reese, there would be this moment of either becoming more attached again or co-regulating in a way where scenes that always struck me the most in this one and in the first one was when you would see the emotion centers of other people, both for comic effect, but also for, a thematic effect as well. So that was the part where I was like, everything up to this point, I've really been like, yeah, go with it. But that was a moment where I was like, almost, but not quite.
Yeah.
For me.
Yeah, I love that you can look at the different paradigms, Western versus Eastern, individualistic versus more communal. That's a really important factor.
Yeah. I was going to say, since we're on that scene too, I'll bring up that like I did appreciate that like a part of her grappling with that feeling of anxiety and panic, there was like physical grounding that happened. Like the movie sort of like insinuates that like she's feeling the bench, she's listening to the ice skates, she's possibly like focusing on her breathing, and I think that like that's something that can be underrated, and I appreciate that they made a nod to that in the movie. The like grounding is super helpful if you're having an existential crisis. Like you cannot always reason your way out of feelings, because feelings are not reasons, they're feelings, you know?
Mhm.
And so for her to do those grounding things to kind of bring herself down to the window of tolerance, I appreciated that. I'm like, a panic attack in a 13-year-old for the first time? No. I don't believe that that suspends credulity or whatever the phrase is. Like,
Yeah.
I don't believe that would have been possible in that moment. I think, like you said, Caleb, like co-regulating would have been something that I would have expected more with an adult who recognizes what a panic attack feels like, and perhaps like registers that on her face empathetically, and kind of like brings her down. Like, hey, Riley, calm down. Let's breathe together through this, man. Let's calm down a little bit, and let's talk about what's going on after you've taken the second to like come down a little bit.
And
But I did appreciate what they were going for.
well, and I'm thinking about what you two are both saying, both as parents, as dads, sort of like what part of your parental homework is, insofar as like not just co-regulating, but kind of explaining not like all the processes of puberty, but in this regard, this sort of sense of like your feelings are going to go they're going to dial to 11 in a way that you've never experienced before. So that's why I think you were mentioning it before, Reese, if there was like either more involvement with parents or like a moment even with that coach where she was sort of like, you're not the only one, Riley. Like, you're not the only one. Because that's what I feel like the best kind of therapy that we do is sort of revealing to people that they're not the only one. And then that was what felt like the core message of the first one, where the way that she was able to see the memory as joyful and sad is as soon as the whole team was involved, as soon as both of her parents were involved. So that's where I know I'm harping on this one scene and I'm like, this is why I did, but it just felt like in that moment I was wanting like, no, there needs to be something external. Like you're saying, Stephen, like the grounding, the breathing, and then the follow-up where she's experiencing joy and kind of like going through the motion. That was that was also beautiful. I really loved that too.
Yes,
But I wanted something external. I wanted something to sort of help her course correct, because if you're 13 or you're 40, sometimes you need help to course correct.
absolutely.
Yeah, very much too. And I think that would have been a much richer way of going about it. Is okay, so she's this 13-year-old, she doesn't know what's going on, and a person comes to render aid and to be present. To be dark and cynical, the other more realistic thing would be like she finds some drug, or she finds, she gets her phone, or she dissociates, or eats sugar or something, because those are other ways of numbing out the feelings. And it's nice that they didn't go that way, because that, again, that's me being dark and cynical. So so I'm gonna get in my dual IFS and Orthodox soapboxes for a little bit. So in the climax scene, one of the things that I really appreciated, I mean, it's the story is told really well. You've got all of the emotions now converging on the control center, and they all have their different agendas. And it's a cool sort of scene where the rising action, the crisis is happening, and then they all have to come together to work together. It's this really cool moment. In there, there's this very particular move where anxiety is just like flurrying in a tornado around the control panel, and technological fluctuations. Okay. So there's there's the anxiety tornado, and you see Joy like pushing against the maelstrom to like kind of join anxiety in there. And there's this very connective present moment. And so me, the internal family systems therapist, a big part of what we do is, it's this curiosity toward all of the parts. some of our teachers, we talk about this very distinct move towards in gentleness and compassion and calm to connect with, not to solve or understand, and definitely not to get rid of, but just to be with. And so you see the joy emotion doing that to anxiety, and it's in that moving toward and that connection that they're able to come to a resolution. And then kind of at the end, you see anxiety is still there, part of the crew.
Yes,
they've got their own chair, they have a voice, they're not running the show, and so that's I love how they depicted that sort of integration of a part. Where I'd critique that, and this would be, and again, this would be like unlikely to happen just on its own in like a 13-year-old. But if they do an Inside Out 3, which maybe they shouldn't, what I would really want them to do would be to really establish the self, where Riley herself talks to her feelings. And I remember feeling this at the first one too. That's kind of the only thing really, well, other than the community. That's one of the major pieces I think is missing. Within like the mindfulness work, there's how it would be that there would be all of these feelings, but then Riley would be speaking into them and connecting with them in her own different ways. And I know that could be a fun drama.
And then for the feelings to talk back.
Yeah.
That'd be so cool.
That'd be amazing.
Yeah.
Yeah. Because that's realistically, that's how it works for us. I would like that too from an Orthodox perspective too. The way that they have depicted this this is a very great depiction of the passions, how we understand passions. It's related to this idea of passivity, where stuff just works upon us. Anger works upon us. Sadness works upon us. Drunkenness, debauchery, they work upon us. And when we are passive, the idea of like when we take a passive stance and these passions just like happen, we're not, and so when we're given over to them, that's the state of us being inactive, not present in our own selves. And so again, from within Orthodox Christian practice, becoming a healthier person is to take a very active stance, which it oftentimes means saying no to a thing, and everything, but even just kind of dialoguing, setting some parameters or whatever. But it comes down to that same idea of how it is in the movie. It's these emotions are running around. They're doing stuff to Riley, and hopefully they'll get it right. The place I would love to see this go is, well, now Riley is working with her own feelings, kind of taking mastery of her own life, and we see the kind of person, and then Riley actually gets to be the self in this case, or in that case.
Yeah.
Okay. It would be Inside Out 3: Attack of the
Ego. Return of the id.
No, but I mean that's the logical next step, right? Is sort of like contending with self. Because we see the burgeoning sense of self in here, and it does a good job with core beliefs and all that kind of stuff. But then you're talking about the next thing, which is these feelings occur, and especially when you're a teen, you're like, there's so many feelings that occur. And you're starting to get a better sense of, you're getting sharper, you're understanding how the world works, all that sort of thing. But then in the midst of that flooding sense of feeling, the ego is like very subtly becoming formed. So I was kind of jokingly saying attack the ego, but like that is kind of the next logical step, is sort of like you were saying, and sort of like from the best of religious tradition, like what do you do with yourself when it is dominated by these passions, dominated by, and again, if this attack of the ego would be PG-13. But if we had like, addictions or, of these other things, right? Because that's where our ego kind of runs amok and has been so informed by our feeling to the point that it's just sort of running the show. But again, we're kind of going off I don't know if Pixar and Disney are so inclined to do something that deep, but who knows?
Maybe if they set Inside Out on a Star Destroyer, they could pull it off. So... Oh, whoops. Yeah, there's a lot there. Well, no, I know, Caleb, you don't have much more time with us. But yeah, what will be some closing thoughts on like like would you recommend this to people? Would you recommend this to clients? Would you recommend it to kids? Would you recommend it to parents or not for whatever reason?
I would definitely recommend it to both clients and, if they're teen clients, to their parents as well, because I feel like it does such a good job of sort of informing the way that you guys were sort of alluding to this before as well with social media, just the way that anxiety is not like present. It's like the water that kids are swimming in constantly. And so I think this just does a really good job of showing what that's like, how it's this constant sense of planning. And the planning is for the sake of acceptance, for the sake of liking oneself, for the sake of other people liking you, and all that sort of thing. So that plus the panic scene. Panic scene was really beautiful. It just did such a good job of that like frenetic, frantic pace that, as I'm starting to work with clients that describe panic, it very much pans out, pun unintended, but it very much acts like that. So for those scenes alone, I think it's really, really powerful. It's also really funny. I mean, we kind of didn't have a whole lot of time to talk about that, but that's what's so important about like a good comedic movie that has a lot of meat to it, like this one does, where it just makes light of things, gives levity to things that were like, oh, like, whew, like, I'm not the only one that's envious of so and so for this. I'm not the only one that's constantly planning, right? Kind of going back to not feeling alone. Like it does a really good job of being like, this is a universal human experience. Anxiety is not yours, it is ours. It's everybody's.
Yep. I really appreciate that. Tapping into the universal experiences and the functionality of it too. And they are pretty explicit about like, your job is this and your job is this, and this part does that. And and anxiety is really open, like, I'm trying to help. I'm trying to make her happy. Uh, as the parts do, and they, do it in these really extreme ways that ultimately don't work. But their intent is good, which is why we don't exile them or send them away. And that's a great thematic component. Building off of the first one. The first one, Joy is very much like nobody but me, and definitely not sadness. And they learn something about that. But here, there's still this urge to like, oh, bad memories, send those far away. Let's not make those part of us. And it's like, yeah, as soon as sadness is allowed to be there and like all of the memories are allowed to be there, like the person gets to be like a whole and balanced person, and they're just like really fragile up until then. So, yeah.
Absolutely. And to thinking about anxiety in that moment of panic, and like, I think there's a broad sort of misconception that like we need to do away with, we need to exile. Like the answer is to exile anxiety and sadness, and anxiety is just a protector, right? And in its preferred role, if I'm going to use and borrow internal family systems language, in its preferred role, it serves a functional purpose, and it needs to be at the console. Same with sadness, which we saw in movie number one. Sadness does not need to be exiled. It needs to be an integral part of who we are, and how we experience life, and how we come together in relationship, because it is these are universal feelings. And so if we can use those, if we can lean into them and trust them for what they are, we can use those to come together, and we can use those to build relationship, both with ourselves and with other people.
Yeah. Yeah. I thought they did that theme really well. Let's make room for sadness. And in a sense, let's even make room for anxiety a little more carefully.
Yeah.
But
giving anxiety a voice, to be sure.
Yeah, absolutely. So, yeah, I think, yeah, I would recommend the first one to people, clients, parents, all day long. I might have a few reservations about the second one. It, it has a darker feel to it, which again is also very true to life. So I guess the third one would be like really, really sinister, maybe. I don't know that I would recommend this one for kids, unless there had been like a whole lot of pre-conversation. Like if it's really solidly within the family culture, like we talk about feelings and we were familiar with the language of like the inner world and mental health, and can see what we need to in here. So I'd probably be a little bit more cautious with the second one, outside of a clinical context. But that's me. So
I could see being cautious about showing it to kids. Like kids are so empathetic and great at observation and terrible at interpretation, right? And so for a kid to watch that panic scene, like, yeah, you don't want to inflict panic on your children and for them to experience a moment of panic without having some kind of a context for like, how do we talk about this? How do we like separate ourselves from the movie and from the thing that we're watching and stuff like that. That being said, like I would definitely recommend this to just about everybody with the qualification, like, yeah, we are talking about this, and hopefully that is what it results in, that like people are having more conversation about feelings in our internal world and the disparity between our inner world and our outer world and that sort of thing. I think for those purposes, it's a great movie.
yeah.
And I think just like one thought to what you guys have been saying about like being cautious about the ages, it almost stands to reason that you would want kids that are closer to Riley's age in the second movie to be watching it, because you just get this sense of awareness that comes with puberty, that pre-puberty would just kind of freak them out, or more likely they'd be disengaged. They'd be like, what the heck is this? You know,
Right.
it's not gonna mean anything to them. But I think when you are closer to that teenage, or like, I don't know, 10, 11, I think you would kind of be at a better place to understand.
Yeah, I do. I mean, I've never had the experience of watching these movies as a kid, obviously, because they didn't come out then. But I love watching them as an adult, having these fuller perspectives and being able to kind of know where everything fits and where everything goes and all of that. So, you know, they're just different experiences there. But yeah, overall, yeah, it's a good addition to the canon of movies about counseling and emotions and everything. So we can definitely make some good use of it and everything. But thank you both for jumping in the conversation, working through the technology stuff. Caleb, if someone wants to get a hold of you for more conversation, where's a good place to reach you?
Yeah, so I have a website, Caleb Keller Counseling, PLLC. It's a mouthful. .net. And then you can also find me on Facebook. Just my first and last name, Caleb Keller. Picture that looks like me. And then on Instagram, I'm CK Counseling. And I've been doing some reels about thoughts on different movies and stuff like that. So, yeah.
And I enjoy them very much. I highly recommend Caleb's Instagram.
Thank you, Steven.
Very smart indeed. Cool. Well, thank you. And again, Steven Black, where I know you work in Vancouver at Furcrest.
Yes, indeed. I work in Vancouver at Furcrest. I'm not on the socials for any functional reasons. So if you want to get a hold of me, you can go to furcrestbh.com, as in behavioral health, furcrestbh.com. And you want to work with somebody who loves talking about feelings, let's do it. Otherwise, if you want to get a hold of me, you can go to newpatterncounseling.com and get a hold of my good friend here, and he'll put you in touch with me.
I will.
How's that?
That works very well. You can sign up at my patreon.com/outer circle, and send me some dollars every month so I can do more of these and maybe even pay my friends. Otherwise, yes, newpatterncounseling.com, singular pattern, for all of your complex addiction scenario needs, and sometime we'll come back with more stories. But excellent. Thank you all. We'll talk with you all soon.
Thank you, Reese.
Goodbye.